Throughout church history, there's always been parts of the Catholic Church that have been at odds with each other. And in this video, I really want to discuss the odd and seemingly confusing nature of the Catholic Church as it stands today, where we can be united under one faith, one dogma, one doctrine, the magisterial teachings, yet seemingly be operating by what looks like almost different belief systems in different churches altogether based on individual groups' interpretations of church teachings. And it's really not supposed to be that way. And so that's what I'm going to get into in this video. What I found, and I'm sure many of you have noticed as well, that there are some identifiable characteristics of different undefined groups we're finding in the Catholic Church. So I wanted to kind of explore those groups and some characteristics of those groups, not meant to kind of pigeonhole, that there's only just these three groups, but I think these are three big areas and characteristics that I've kind of fleshed out. I'm curious definitely to hear what you guys have to say about it. And then at the end, just kind of exploring, is there a way to objectively examine if one group is technically more Catholic or following the Catholic faith the way it's supposed to be taught? Because what has to be stressed before we kind of get into it is what's unique and beneficial. The selling point of the Catholic, one holy Catholic apostolic teaching, one apostolic church, is that we don't have these definable branch spin-off sects we find in other Protestant churches, and even I would say, to a certain extent, some Orthodox churches as well, where if you're talking Lutherans, Methodists, Baptists, they all have it's not just one united, like universal Lutheran teaching. They have their kind of spin-off sects. And as Catholics, we're really not supposed to have that. Despite having an East and West church, we still are bound by one holy Catholic apostolic dogma and teaching that we're all essentially operating under, which can be hard to navigate. I mean, sometimes there's a lot of theology for the common person to kind of look at. Definitely, it's a rationale for us to kind of study theology and learn more about our faith. But what we have that these other groups really don't have is we have a handbook, we have a guide, we have our catechism that lays out these simple answers, just some simple questions that the common common layman in the church may have. So that's what I'll kind of get into in this video. If you guys have other comments and questions, I definitely want to hear them. These are just my points of view on this, and I'm in no way trying to pigeonhole people into different groups or sects, but these are just some things I've been noticing that I've been seeing spin up within the Catholic Church. Now, I'll define three groups here. There's probably even a fourth group, which I would say is just people that are totally indifferent. They're just Catholics by name. They don't go to Mass, or maybe once in a while. They don't really have opinion one way or the other. They're kind of lackadaisical. Odds are they probably do have an affiliation with one of these kind of three groups I've kind of narrowed down to. But I'm just kind of throwing that out there. There probably are other different subgroups to this, and for sure people are double dipping in each of these kind of stereotypes that I'm laying out here, but I'll lay out three general groups of Catholics that I've been noticing as being a part of this divide we're seeing within the church. Now, this first group I will lay out is going to be just the liberal or left-wing Catholics. And, I find it kind of ironic because I've heard people tell me that they are Catholic because they are liberal, or they're liberal because they're Catholic. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've heard people say, well, I'm conservative because I'm Catholic, or I'm Catholic because I'm conservative. And it's kind of funny that you can have this extreme when, we have an objective framework, what's laid out, what's expected of you, what's the actual religion kind of commands us to do, that we can have these vast interpretations of being overly liberal or conservative. Now, in this group, I would say the liberal Catholic group, here are some characteristics that I found. Generally, they're an older crowd. And for better or for worse, I mean, I give them credit. I think on average across most parishes across the United States, most Novus Ordo parishes, you find them to be making up the majority of the people filling the pews, I would say, on Sundays. Now, I can't definitively necessarily say that. That's a kind of a general thing I've kind of noticed. And I find that they, you see this as well, that the majority of the clergy and higher ups within the church appear to fall within this camp as well. So that's something to go without saying, but it's unfortunate. We're just not seeing many young people back in church, at least among this particular crowd, I would say. These individuals generally this type of Catholic loves, people like Bishop Barron, James Martin, Richard Rohr. Again, not saying there's anything wrong with that. And sometimes you point this out to them and you expose them to something else. They're so ingrained in this type of theology and Catholic study and just when I hear about parishes and the books they're promoting, you see these books. When you throw something else that may sound conservative, they almost get thrown back. Like, well, what is this? This is not Catholic. So that's the extreme we're getting at. Or the people that are reading these types of books, I don't think they characterize themselves as like really liberal based books. They just would look at them as, well, this is kind of mainstream Catholic thinking in the point in time, which, maybe they don't even see the other side, and vice versa. If you're on the, on the right wing side, which I'll get into. Again, this group, I think finds anything medieval or old is kind of outdated. Whether that's just architecture, literal architecture, or just practices we found in the church, anything pre-Vatican II, which when you read Vatican II, I'm not going to digress too much, we're not seeing any call for getting rid of the old. In fact, you kind of see a lot of it when you look at how I believe the document is called the General Instruction of the Roman Missal, the current General Instruction of the Roman Missal, post-Vatican II. A lot of the things we're supposed to still be doing are still supposed to kind of be here. We found pre-Vatican II. Digressing though, I mean, things like they think communion in the tongue, kneeling is weird. They think it's not necessary. Again, I'm just going off general consensus and just their own actions and what people have even told me. I find that these people love a good homily more than they do, or they love a good homily. They love they love good music as far as their tastes are concerned. They like kind of, modern day music, or just big kind of production based value over, I'd say, things like a profound reverence during the Eucharist. I've heard people tell me, and I think I said this in the last video, someone said, isn't there more to Mass than just reverence during communion or a good Eucharist presentation? They're saying, isn't a homily maybe superior to that, other facets of Mass that are better? They believe maybe dressing up for Mass isn't really necessary anymore. And I find I found that definitely this group of people, prior, I know when I was younger, you would see a lot more suits and ties from the same group of people. And now, whether that's just our culture in general, you might see them show up in like a polo shirt, maybe like a Tommy Bahama type shirt, sometimes just wearing shorts. Again, I'm not judging here. I'm just saying that generally you don't see shirt and ties necessarily from this group that much anymore. We see they view kind of active participation more so in like hand gestures, outward motions, and physical praise. I've been to Novus Ordo parishes where the band directors like really kind of almost yelling at people in the pews to get up and stand up and wave your hands in the air, when some people just don't like that. That's not their version of active participation. They don't see, if you're sitting there maybe not singing, just praying, maybe kneeling, they don't view that as active participation, when again, even if you read Vatican II, that's technically what's they're really describing is active participation. They consciously or unconsciously adopt a seamless garment theory. And that seamless garment theory, if you're not familiar with that is, that's this theory that kind of says that kind of a relative approach to, let's say, like a view like pro-life, that they'll say, well, it's not just about abortion. You have to consider like climate change and social justice. These are just as or equally important factors that we have to consider in the pro-life sphere than just being literal pro-life for abortion's sake, which is something we could get into. They think there should be female priests or deacons. I've seen that kind of come up a lot more among this group. They don't necessarily promote or I don't know, believe in sacramentals compared to, I would say, more traditional conservative type Catholics. You don't necessarily hear them. I'm sure I don't hear them stress this. Things like the scapular. Yes, you'll see holy water and stuff like that, but other sacramentals, like even medals, certain prayer devotions, I'll get into this later, but even like certain apparitions, you never hear them talk about things like Fatima, Akita, Lourdes. Maybe briefly it's mentioned, but even just anything supernatural, you don't see them discuss too much. Even the rosary, honestly, it's sad to say, I don't see stressed as much in this group. Versus, again, when you compare it to the group I'll get into next. And they see really no problem in supporting, let's say, in a political sphere, any kind of Democratic or Democratic Party. I mean, it should go without saying, but they really don't see that there's any problem supporting a pro-abortion candidate based on, that, again, kind of this seamless garment theory that there's other, there's other issues that might be just as pressing that we have to consider versus the intrinsic evil that we find in abortion. So now that kind of leads us into the next group, which is kind of the right-wing side. And I would say, getting into this, it doesn't necessarily mean that I would say right-wing or conservative or traditional Catholics. This would be that next wing. is ultimately going to vote for a conservative candidate. I find that they'd vote for independent if it was something as they would take definitely a harder stance on something like abortion. If you had a conservative candidate that was, said they were registered Republican and they were pro-choice, this group for sure would not adopt any seamless garment theory justification for voting for them. I think they would essentially say don't vote. They believe in more reverence. Again, we see a lot more reverence, stressing to reverence during the actual liturgy in this group. This is a group that wants to see altar rails back. We see definitely more of a reverent communion or Eucharistic procession is trumping more than an awesome. They care more about the Eucharist than they do an awesome homily. These group of individuals kind of stress being dressing up for your Sunday best, against things like female priests, deacons, even altar girls. What that goes without saying up before. You might see more of an emphasis. You might see more veils. We believe and see a much more greater use and respect of the sacramentals and blessed items, even things like blessed salt, even crucifixes. I mean, you don't even see crucifixes, sadly, in some of these churches anymore. I didn't say that in some of these kind of new Novus Ordo liberal type churches, unfortunately. Blessed candles, you don't rarely hear that talked about anymore unless you're in a conservative camp. They believe and promote church-approved Marian apparitions, or just talking about Marian apparitions in general, but specifically the church-approved ones, because I'll get into that in my third group. People like the apparitions, like I mentioned, Akita, La Salette, Lourdes, Fatima. Of course, much respect to Fatima, and much more specific to our times right now. More skeptical, you find this group much more skeptical in government, and just the issue of a potential rise of collectivism / communism. And again, to the extreme, to give like these all sound like maybe pros, depending how you want to look at it. But, this group may reject elements of Vatican II or believe it was a mistake and did more harm than good. Versus, I should go without saying, that liberal sect kind of says that, well, they and think Vatican II is awesome and that this was the way to go. Now that leads me to people in the middle. Now, this is another group that I should have said this in the beginning. I would say this and group number 1 actually probably makes up the majority. That's what I kind of meant to say. This group may make up the majority of people you're seeing in Mass. So this might have been unfair, and I should have said that right from the get-go. But the people in the middle, I would say, tend to skew, as far as politically, definitely a little bit more on the conservative side, what I'm noticing. They tend to be a little more involved with that charismatic movement. These are people that I find are really heavily into the Medjugorje apparitions, more so than I'd say the other church-approved apparitions, the other officially church-approved apparitions. But a lot of huge people in the Medjugorje crowd, they love things like, Catholic Answer, relevant radio type stuff. Not saying nothing's wrong with that. These are people that accept Vatican II, but believe it just really wasn't implemented correctly. A lot of people will say that a lot, that they realize there's some faults. It just wasn't done the right way, but they definitely are pro Vatican II and the things it did. Definitely this group of people, like many, I would say you find different thoughts with the first 2 groups I listed, but definitely this group, compared to all of them, have a strong love for John Paul II. I find this group has a lot more respect for and reverence for Divine Mercy Sundays, again, because of its kind of charismatic nature. You sometimes see this in the traditional movements, but sometimes you find some traditionalists and conservative Catholics not necessarily being as into Divine Mercy Sunday. That's just my thing I've noticed. And I find this group, again, they like some sacramentals, like holy water, rosary, for sure the rosary. But I found this people kind of draw the line at scapulars. You just don't see these people really promoting things like scapulars and some other classical sacramentals. And like I said, lean more conservative, but are sympathetic to some liberal views. But I'd say in general, this middle ground person generally by far is, I shouldn't say by far, but definitely skews more in the pro-life, anti-abortion camp. Now, this gets into the final point I want to make in this video that I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this, because I could be wrong, but I don't think I am personally on this. Basically saying that one of these groups essentially has to win out. One group, by definition, will have to be more Catholic than the other one. I say that because, unlike, like I said, these other different denominations of Christian, Protestantism and stuff like that, we have a framework, we have a guidebook that explains that to us really pretty black and white in our catechism, in our dogma, in our doctrine. And like I said at the start, yes, it might require some theology, and you can use some mental gymnastics to get around certain things, but there are a lot of issues that are clearly black and white and spelled out for you. Very simply saying, I mean, right off the bat, that, if you don't believe the dogmas of the church, the doctrines of the church, some of the magisterial teachings in general, you have stepped outside of the faith. I've said this many other videos, and it's a simple thing, as some other people have said before, but it's worth reiterating. If you stepped outside the faith, your own religion is telling you that you are no longer part of this religion. All right, so that is, to me, that is that nails it right there. I didn't even get into the respect of the sacraments. I mean, that should have been something I threw as like different criteria in those 3 areas about just reverence of the sacraments and actually following the faith. But that's what I'm kind of wrapping it up here, that if we actually study the catechism, if you're somebody who's in one of these groups and you're trying to understand kind of where you're fitting in these things, if you're confused about a certain issue, you have your answers in the catechism. And yes, people say, well, the Baltimore Catechism, especially in older catechisms, really are not out of date. You could argue the newer catechism makes things in a more modern time a little more clear. But really, there's not anything in the newer catechisms that is rejecting something we have in something as simple as the Baltimore Catechism. So you could pick up that thin little, or look at it online, the thin catechism, the Baltimore Catechism, and study it and say, do I believe all these things that I'm saying? And especially, I would say, for the far left liberal group, I think this is the group that really has some things to look into. When you start saying things about the faith, like you don't see the need for reverence, you don't see the need for, you think some things like communion in the tongue and kneeling and other reverence is kind of outdated. Again, I challenge you to look at the catechism and see just how, how undated it really is, or I should say how dated it is compared to your definitions. And so this is what I'm trying to say, is that with any religion, with a Bible church, they have their set of rules and they will lay out, this is the foundation. And I always ask people, if you don't like the rules, you can find one that suits you. But this is what makes something a religion, is just that. It's the rules and the dogma and the doctrine. So when you have these people that are possibly they are just ignorant of the faith, but when you explain to them that this is what the faith proclaims, what the faith says, they will then hang their hat on the cultural environment that they're surrounded in, maybe in their diocese, their parish, or their priest that they're following, and say, well, my priest so-and-so doesn't necessarily believe this, therefore I'm not going to. That doesn't make any sense, right? They don't make up just the whole entirety of the religion, especially in a religion like the Catholic faith that lays things out for you clear as day in the catechism. So my point making this video isn't to describe these 3 groups and then judge these 3 groups. I'm just laying out some stereotypes and characteristics of 3 groups that I find make up some different sects of the group. Now, just because I said, I kind of point my finger at the left-wing group, if you're a far right-wing, far conservative, and you can be losing the forest for the trees for sure. You're taking things, possibly taking a Pharisee-like approach to things, where things are all just purely dogmatic, and you're losing sight of the actual practice of the faith, other than the actual rules and gestures. Are you actually living out the faith in your daily life with your family, friends, being forgiving and humble throughout your daily life? That should go without saying. And I think we can find issues in that as well. But my whole point in making this video was highlighting these differences and then saying, if you're somebody, maybe you yourself are confused, or someone who's confused, point them to the catechism, because even this is a part of evangelization and our mission as Catholics. Our mission in the Catholic faith is to save souls. That doesn't just mean going on a street corner and evangelizing to people that have no idea about the faith. It also means educating, and that's part of being an evangelist, is education and teaching and living it out, is teaching fellow Catholics. So you literally, half the time, we are evangelizing each other back into the straight and narrow of the church. And so hopefully this video provided something, at the very least some commentary, to start a discussion. Interested to see what you guys are saying about it. Again, I just find that this is an issue that should be a non-issue, but fortunately, unfortunately, it's a battle now that we have to wage in teaching the basic tenets of the faith. So point to someone to a catechism, any catechism, and then challenge them to the fact if they disagree with something like the case closed issue on with abortion. That's a non-issue, or it's a big issue, but it shouldn't be an issue that it has to be an issue for debate if you're a Catholic. And other hard issues that if I say on YouTube I get flagged. But I want to leave it at that. Curious to see your thoughts about this, and I'll see you guys in the next one.